being able to admit weakness in some areas is very hard for people. I think as a business owner, it's a strength. There was a lot of conversations I would have offline with a lot of these wrestlers that are amazing humans, and they have such bold faith, but nobody ever asks them about it. Wrestling for me taught me so much about discipline. Motivation is so fleeting. You really have to be a self-starter. If you wrestled, if you ever really have that passion, you get suckered back in at some point. Days where I wake up and there's chaos, even the most simplistic prayers of God, just have your hand on this day. Give me wisdom, give me discernment, just have your hand on this day. And I fell asleep in class, and my professor was like, you don't have to be here. Like, you're paying to be here. If you don't want to be here, don't be here. I never went back. This is Justin Basch, and you listen to the Airey Bros Radio. My big thing with amateur wrestling is I think people need to double down on what they're good at. You see a lot of copycats right now. You see a lot of people, I think, who are like, they're really good at Instagram, but then they think they should do a podcast or vice versa. And I don't think enough people are doubling down on what they're good at and what makes them happy. For me, like, I've been working with the wrestlers since 2008. Cal Sanderson was the first client of mine. So I always understood the business, the branding side. So I try to play to that. I try to bring that up in conversations and kind of have conversations other people don't. So I think just the uniqueness, we were talking about wrestling as like a cult. And it's like you have so many individuals who can bring so much to the table if they're just unique to themselves. And I think the more we have people doing that and leveraging their personal relationships and seeing what they can do, I think that helps a lot.
Was there anything this year as far as, let's talk about NCAs because that just happened, right? As far as guys who maybe you saw got the mic and didn't take advantage of it, or a missed moment on the broadcast side of things?
Wrestling is a tough sport because especially NCAAs, I hate the interviews right after the match. I don't like them because these guys are absolutely exhausted. They're if you watch certain schools like Penn State, they don't even really want to do interviews until the whole tournament's over because it's such a unique tournament and these guys are expected to answer questions that might be good for a podcast or on YouTube, but right after a match, it's hard. And I think a lot of these guys at this point kind of know what they want to say, or they kind of play into their emotions. But I think wrestling right now has a lot of personalities that are they're unique to themselves. You see a guy like Nino Bonacorsi come off winning a championship and he's just like his goofy loving self. Like, you couldn't be happier for the kid. You see guys like Aaron Brooks and David Carr using their platform to profess faith, and that means so much to them. It's almost like they want to wrestle and win a finals match just for that moment again, because they know the spotlight's on them. And I think the more, going back to kind of the content side too, I think the more these wrestlers just be themselves. And I think you're seeing that now with social media, where you're seeing the crossover, you're seeing the guys' personalities on social, and then, on a mic and interview. I think the biggest miss by anybody is just not letting people see more of them. I think one reason I started my podcast was because so many wrestlers have such great stories and they're so focused on winning that they don't take the time to tell their stories. And I think that when these guys peel back the curtain, and the guys who have such a great personality like Burroughs and Yanni, these guys can talk to you for hours and make you feel like you're their best friend and they might have just met you. Having that personality and kind of just letting your guard down, I think is a huge win for wrestlers when they can do that. And I think we're seeing a little bit of a shift with NIL because now wrestlers know that they can monetize and profit off these moments. And I think you're starting to see a little bit more of let the curtain down, pull the curtain back and let fans kind of see more of a glimpse. But a lot of these guys just don't realize how interesting the fans find stuff. I was on a call with Yanni today, who's a friend and client of mine, and we were just talking about different things that we're going to work on over the next year. And there's so many things that, you hear the light bulb click when these high level wrestlers, all they want to do is win worlds, win Olympics. When all of a sudden you look at it from a fan's perspective on what kind of content they want to see, I think then you really start to see it in a different light, because it might be boring for Roman Bravo Young to walk into Rec Hall every single day. Average fan wants to see him walking in, or wants to see a guy's reaction to another match, or to get their thoughts on somebody else's match and kind of use their wrestling brain for that. So I think just the more these guys double down on who they are, and naturally, like anything, like actors, like musicians, like artists, I think that the more they are just themselves, I think you're going to have some guys are better than others. But I think, especially in a sport like college wrestling, these guys who are top 2%, top 1%, winning NCAA titles, winning conference titles, there's a lot of NIL opportunities and incentive to let more out and not kind of keep so much secretive like you often see in the sport.
It's interesting you say that. Are you familiar with Caden Henschel?
Yep.
Do you think it's just because of the level of intensity and maybe some of that secretiveness, not wanting to kind of let people behind the curtain? Is that why? And I know it's been a pretty slow, long burn for him since he's been in high school doing it and been at it, but he's amassed such a following. I coach a small wrestling team down here at the local high school level. Kids on my team, are familiar with who he is. And then I show them a video of Yanni and they're like, who is this guy? Yeah. I'm like, this is the national championships. What are you talking about? Do you think it's just a matter of time before someone picks up on like that on the D1 level? Or is it maybe just because of the level of competition and the intensity that guys are reluctant?
I think the biggest thing with content on any level is consistency. And one thing Caden did very good is he just didn't stop. He just kept producing. And, I started a podcast because running a marketing agency for a decade plus, I'm telling all my clients, you should be having a podcast. You should have a podcast. And I use so many different examples. Like if Dwight and Jim from The Office had a podcast, if Jerry and George from Seinfeld had a podcast, the amount of people that would tune in and hear stories, you don't have to be somebody who wants to be a content creator. You just have to be consistent. And if nothing else, try it. And I think you get a lot of wrestlers that try something and then they stop. And sometimes for good reasons, they get distracted and they're like, hey, this isn't worth it. And, they do something else. Other times just it's hard. You guys know the grind to make content and to schedule stuff and to, have interviews fall through, or, have somebody on that you think is going to be great and it's a flop. Like there's so many hurdles to it and there's a lot of learning to it. And when you take an athlete like a wrestler that, Yanni, for example, is super excited that he's going to be done with school soon, and he can focus a tenth of his school time on personal brand time and really do a lot of cool stuff. So I think one of the bigger things that wrestlers can do to see that success, and like you said, long burn, is just the consistency. That's, the more you get out there, and you're right about guys not knowing who other people are. Like this sport is very regional based. New York guys know a lot about New York. New Jersey guys know a lot about New Jersey. Very few can rattle off things about other states, other schools. So I think there's a lot of opportunities. I just think, man, it takes so much consistency and time. And, you hear the overnight success stories in any industry, but content's one of those that, it might take doing it for a couple years before it hits. One of my favorite, content creators becoming an overnight success story is Gary Vee. everybody knows who he is, but he did 1,000 episodes of a wine TV show on YouTube before it was even, what it is today. And everybody called him an overnight success and this and that. But it's like, man, dude did almost 1,000 video shows that not that many people were tuning into, but it, built something later on.
I think you raise a really good point with Caden. And the most impressive thing with him for me is one, the consistency, being a college student who's an athlete, who's got classes, and he edits there's one out every week. And the fact that win or lose, he's doing one. And if he loses, he's going to talk about the match and that loss. And I think that's where you might lose some of the Division I guys and their
Big
consistency, because it's hard. It's hard when you're in that grind. And I mean, kudos to Caden again. He had a rough tournament this year. He had a great season, but he had a rough end of the year tournament. But he was out there, and that's the rawness of wrestling. And when I talk to Mike Mal, who I do another podcast with, it always goes back to wrestling. Like, you're gonna have blemishes. There's no perfect season, because we were talking about Mason Paris getting the Hodge based on his record, and I was just saying there is no perfect season. The Kale is someone who stands in a league of his own, but for the most part, you're gonna have a couple bumps, you're gonna have a couple blemishes, and I think that's something that we need to emphasize, right? That we need to emphasize when we're kind of pitching a sport.
Yeah, totally. And I think, there's a lot of value. I tell wrestlers all the time, like, the best thing you can do from a content standpoint is sometimes after a loss. If you go out and you talk about that loss, you're going to get a lot more viewers, I think, than if you win the match, because everybody talks when they win. I've had 3 national champions on this year, and I'm like, you know what? I'm starting to see everybody grab all the national champs. I'm like, okay, maybe I'll pivot and do some of the runner-ups. Maybe I'll do some of the finalists that didn't win and kind of hear their perspective and their take on losing and what they want to do, because it is raw. It is real. Speaking of real, I was texting with Real Woods about that. He had a great message afterwards. I'm like, you should come on the podcast. Let's talk about that, because you do get the win. How did you do it? And I love having those on. I've had 60, 70 NCAA World Olympic champs in the podcast, and there's so many different stories. But some of the best stories come from those same guys when they lost a world championship or an NCAA championship. And that's a very mature thing to do, is to talk about a loss right after it. Very few can do that. I think you have to be super focused. And that is a skill that's very tough, especially in a sport that's so personal like wrestling.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because to take it to MMA real quick, I was never a Dominic Cruz fan until he lost to Cody Garbrandt, and he came out and he just put it out there, and hey, he was a better man. He owned it. And that from that moment, I became a huge Dominic Cruz fan, just the way he handled that loss. And I'm curious of your thoughts, and I'll have to get into it. But do you think maybe, the way Spencer kind of handled his situation, do you think that maybe takes away a little bit from his legacy, or maybe turn some fans off because of that?
It's tough. I've gotten a lot of people that have DM'd me about what's your take on it. And it's always tough, for one thing, when you're not in his shoes. You don't know what the injury is. You don't know what he was going through. So on one side, it's tough. On the other side, I've had Spencer on the podcast before, and we talked about Brandon. To be fair to him, he's not a guy who's been super vocal after a win. Right. So I wasn't expecting him to do too much after a loss, if that makes sense. Yeah. I think he's somebody who, if you go back and listen to the first time I had him on the podcast, he said he retweets a lot. He stays engaged, but he doesn't tweet a whole lot. He's a very reserved guy. He's a guy who lets us winning do the talking. And I think you kind of got to expect, not wrestling back. I don't know. my take on it is I wish for both him and his fans he wrestled back, because I think when you have a career like Spencer had, I feel like you both deserve that final match, that final goodbye. I feel like Spencer was kind of robbed of it because he didn't know, I don't think, that was his last match in college. I don't know what the game plan was. I'm sure he was shocked. And I'm sure the fans obviously just assumed he was going to wrestle back the next day. So I do think it's a missed opportunity from a brand building standpoint. But looking back at who he is and historically a more reserved, more quiet guy, it kind of makes sense. And I think a lot of people are already over it. And a lot of people are so moved on. And now the question is, can he be healthy and can he wrestle on the senior level? And I think you have so many people that are kind of saying he should have wrestled back. He should have wrestled back. Then naturally, you're going to have the other side argue for him. And then almost all that noise just kind of, balances each other out.
Well, talking about losses, and correct me if I have any of my facts wrong, but you got third in the state 3 times, or I'm sorry, you got
no,
third,
not even close.
Second 3 times.
I got nothing.
Nothing.
I was about as bad of a wrestler as one can be. I had my coach on who came on because I saw him in the barbershop. He said, I loved what you're doing with your podcast. And I said, Coach, I got to be honest. When I saw you sitting over there, I didn't even know if you remembered who I was, because I was never any good. And he jokes that it was a state championship team, blah, blah, blah. I don't think I was any good. But it was nice to hear him tell me maybe I was, but I definitely wasn't.
Okay. So someone who says they're not any good at wrestling, why are you doing a podcast still? What kind of keeps you coming back to it? And what did you learn from maybe some of your losses or just from the sport in general that gives you such a passion for it?
I think wrestling for me taught me so much about discipline and so much about, motivation is so fleeting. You really have to be a self-starter. And you have to want it when you wrestle. I don't care what you want to want it, or going to practice gets old after a week. And my coach used to famously to me say that there's only maybe 5, 6, 7 days a year you actually really want to be in the room. The rest of the year you're just kind of there because you have to be. So for me, wrestling taught me so much. I feel like it really shaped who I was, my character, my drive. So after I graduated high school, I didn't really do much of anything. I worked at a Wegmans warehouse. I worked at a Burger King. I did driveway sealing, you name it. But, we were talking before about pro wrestling. In high school, I would actually build pro wrestling news websites and work on pro wrestling news websites, talking back like 2000, 2001. We ran WrestleMagazine.com, all sorts of, wrestling news websites. And after high school, I'd kind of gotten out of that. And in 2006, 2007, I slowly started getting back into it. My buddy Mike Farron, we did a lot together in high school. He was down in Florida at the time. So he kind of got me back into it. Like, bro, everything we were doing back then is years ago is so far ahead of what people are doing from a business standpoint now. So we kind of slowly got back into it, and we were both kind of in a bad space mentally, kind of got our acts together. And in like 2006, 2007, I started tuning into NCAAs again. And I want to say it was after 2007 or 2008. 2008 was when I started my company, Basch Solutions. And I actually reached out to Cal Sanderson and I said, hey, this is a long shot, but I really don't think your digital presence does you any justice for who you are and what you've accomplished. And I was really just learning about him at the time. And as I was learning about him, I'm like, man, this guy's brand could be huge. So I emailed him. God, had to be the night of NCAAs. And he actually emailed me back a couple months later and we started talking about it. So he became a client of mine. We built him a website in 2008, the first of a couple we built. And when I got connected with him and started working with him, the next year, I want to say, is when he went to Penn State. So he moves out to Penn State. I went down to State College. He was actually house shopping at the time. And I went with him, looked at a few houses, kind of got to know each other a little bit. It really felt like a recruiting trip. Like he kind of treated me like a recruit, basically. And so with him, I started really following Penn State. And I started kind of getting back into wrestling. And then Jake Varner became a client of mine. At the time, Les Sigmund, we did some work for him. And then now I'm starting to really follow it. And when you wrestled, it's kind of like we're talking pro wrestling and getting in and out. Like you might get away from amateur wrestling, but if you ever really have that passion, you get suckered back in at some point. I don't know how long it'll take, but everybody gets suckered back in. So after Cal and Varner were both clients, then in 2012, now I'm really starting to pay attention. Jordan Burroughs catches my eye in 2011, and then we started working together after he won gold in 2012. So then at that point, I had this crew of just incredible athletes. And now I started really following the international scene because Burroughs was a client of mine. So I'm getting up, I'm watching the tournaments, I'm following it all. So from there, the business grew on the wrestling side where I'm working with David Taylor and so many other top guys. Now I'm all in. And as I continued to grow in the space, there was a lot of conversations happening that I was just very blessed to have. I'd go in the Penn State room. Cal would make me feel like family. And I knew so many of these guys, having so many great conversations. Fast forward a couple of years, when I'm telling all my clients, you should have a podcast, you should have a podcast. I did a faith and political podcast for like 6 months with a buddy of mine, Billy, and he got so busy we weren't able to do it. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do a podcast with my clients. And I had started a podcast that wasn't going to be wrestling. It was just going to be faith, political, my clients, whatever. So the first episode, I think, was Jim Miller from the UFC. And then Kevin Sorbo, who played Hercules, he's a client of mine. He was on the podcast. And then from there, it was like Bo Nickel came on, who was a client. And it was all of a sudden, there was like 5 or 6 wrestlers in a row. And I'm like, okay, you know what? I think this just has to be a wrestling podcast. And obviously the name Bashmania stems from Hulkamania. Like that's just a easy play on words that, I didn't really think too much of. It was just when I was in high school, I had bashmania.com and I literally just took photos. It's funny. I took photos of people in high school, and at the end of the week, I would just make a photo gallery of them. And it was on my website. This was before Facebook. This was like 2004. I'm taking photos with like a Sony CyberShot T9 camera, and I'm putting photo galleries on a website called Bashmania where my friends can go on and see pictures. So that's how the podcast kind of got started. And then from there, I've just, Bash Solutions is a pretty busy marketing agency, but I try to just fill that void with wrestling where I can, help wrestlers get their stories out there, help share, create content where I can if I see a void, trying to just basically do what I can, to help the sport as much as I can.
How much of your business is wrestling and how much is other stuff?
Wrestling is a very, very small subset. It started getting to the point to where for a while there, we were working with a lot of wrestlers, and I actually kind of started transitioning it. Thank God NIL happened, because now I can just more so sponsor some athletes and I basically use money that the podcast generates and I sponsor wrestlers with it. I'll build them websites. I'll do consulting with them. We'll do brand work. So, it's a very small, from a Bash Solution standpoint, wrestling's a very, very small percentage of the actual work. But it is interesting, I do meet people through wrestling who have other businesses, and we end up working together. There's people that I've met through the podcast specifically that are like, hey, you should help me with this company in California, in Iowa, and other places. So it does work out to where the reason why I tell everybody to podcast, is it's such a great brand play. It does work. I'd say more business that comes from the wrestling space is non-wrestling than wrestling, actually.
And is the majority of that, I know you said you got some things, Iowa, Pennsylvania, that sort of stuff. Do you have a good core group of stuff in Rochester too?
Yeah, Rochester is by far the biggest area. I would say we have a lot of local clients, everything from car dealerships that we build custom platforms for and their websites, to mom and pop pizza shops, to right now we're building a website for a local catering company, working on a bunch of stuff for a mortgage broker. So Rochester is definitely the core demographic. And I'd actually say probably Boston is number two. We've had a lot of clients in the Boston real estate world that have continued to kind of spider out and branch out into other companies that people are affiliated with. They're like, hey, you should definitely use them. So definitely a nice group of work clients here in Rochester.
And is most of that like web services and stuff?
Yeah, so at our core, Basch Solutions is a custom website company. We don't use anything open source. We don't use WordPress or anything. We built a proprietary CMS probably about 10 years ago now that we've been working with. So at our core, we do a lot of custom websites, but we've kind of transitioned it to do more. We'll build somebody a custom website and then try to add on more technology, add more development. We'll help them on social media. We'll do consulting. So for a long time, website was our main thing. We just did website. And it got to a point where it got kind of boring, because you build a website for somebody, you kind of learn a lot about the business. And then it's like, okay, let's help you with something else. And if we're just building a website, you only need a website maybe once every 3 years. So, we started really doing more with content creation, and it's a lot of the stuff you see on Bashmania is stuff that my company does for people normally. It's fun to kind of work, myself and my team, and kind of do stuff for Bashmania with it.
And on the wrestling side of things, all the stuff that we see, are you creating that, or do you outsource that to some of the people within your brand?
A lot of what I do on Bashmania, I do personally. I think back in high school, I was the one who did everything. I was updating websites, I was building websites. I could design a website and then I could integrate it into something. So I used to do a lot of design, development, graphics. And as the company grew, I had to kind of get out of that and have people doing it. And it was one thing that I missed, having my hands dirty. So with Bashmania, it's fun. I might have one of my guys, like I had my guys build the website for Bashmania. We try to do a lot of cool functionality where you can go on the website and you can click, let's say, podcast guests by school. So you can click Iowa and see all the Iowa guests. You can click Penn State, see all the Penn State guests. You can click topics like MMA or faith and see episodes just based on that. So a lot of the web stuff, I'd say my guys do. A lot of what you see content creation wise, I try to have fun with it. Every now and then I definitely have them hop in and do something, but a lot of it for me is it's just an outlet. I love creating. I love being able to do stuff, especially when you don't have to. It's so fun. If I don't want to do anything for Bashmania for the next 6 months, I don't have to. That's kind of a nice incentive to be able to keep doing things and to keep kind of doing as much as you can when you don't have to do it.
Before, you mentioned that you were doing Facebook, Instagram before it was even a thing, figuring out a way just to kind of get your photos out there, because that's what you like to do. You like to create content. And we were talking about you helping people build their brands, and for a while it was just the websites, but social media has really become a thing. How much has that changed kind of your presence and things, and the need for websites for maybe smaller businesses? Like, do you think smaller businesses can get away without having a website in the world of social media, or do you think having that landing page is a necessity?
I think it's a necessity. I think, having a social profile is great. If it dies tomorrow, you're screwed. And that's my big thing is you can have Instagram, you can have Facebook, you can have these platforms. You don't own anything about it. And if something happens, you're going to be caught completely off guard. And I think a website is like a central hub. I don't care what you do, your website is the hub that people go to. It might be to find your address, it might be to fill out a contact form, it might be the simplest of things. But we're so conditioned. I mean, think about how long we've been going to websites now. It's 25, 30 years. I mean, I started going on websites in like 1998. So the amount of time we've conditioned ourselves to, no, 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 I'm just going to go figure it out. I'm going to go on their website. We have so ingrained that into our culture now that I think people are not going away from websites, even the smallest of businesses. It's funny, people, there's some people that think like, okay, I have Instagram, I don't really need a website. And then all of a sudden you see them making a link tree. Well, why are you making a link tree? Well, you got to put all your links in one place so people can go here. Well, that's a website. It might be the most simplistic landing page available, but that's a website. You're what you want. I had an old friend reach out the other day about a website for a business she was launching. I'm like, I personally, I would go try to make one as cheap as possible, do a little do-it-yourself website, and in 2 to 3 years, call me and we'll help you once you have a bit more substance under your belt. Because I think that's when you can really benefit the website to streamline what you're doing, digitalize it. But I think, everybody needs a website. I don't care if you're selling cupcakes at the corner. I think from a job application standpoint, from a news standpoint, social's great. And I think social's a necessity as well for companies. But I still think websites are just that central hub that you really can't get around using it.
Bringing up that you had a friend contact you and you said, "Hey, go make something cheap, simple, build it up, and in 3 years, maybe I can help you out with something." So, at what point do you think, or how people should maybe look at, maybe I need a Squarespace, maybe I need to hit up Batch Solutions? How do you kind of navigate that? And maybe starting off, what do you think are just necessities that every website should have on it?
So we build custom websites. So they're not cheap. We custom design them, we custom develop them, and they take a month to build. So anybody can just use their imagination to think about working for 30 days and what you would charge to work for somebody for 30 days. It's not a cheap task or cheap project. And if you're starting a new company, the toughest thing about a website for a new company is you don't have the content. You don't have the substance to really build the website around. Whereas one of the websites we're building right now, for example, is for an event center. They just remodeled the whole thing. They have endless photos to work with. They have endless photo galleries of previous events. They can show the before and afters of how much they renovated it. That's where I think somebody like us comes into play. And it's like, okay, give us what you have, and we're going to try to turn this into gold. I think a good website doesn't just look pretty. A good website it's a business tool. It should convert. And I think early on we saw success with our websites because we were never trying to over design them. They're very slick looking, but we've never tried to over design them. We've always tried to say, what is your business? Let's make this convert into what you want. And nowadays, in the last 2-3 years, we've seen a huge shift from people who just wanted websites because they wanted leads. Now I'm getting more people that need help because of everything but that. They have more work than they know what to do with. But their problem might be they need to hire employees. Well, it's very hard for a company to get employees if your website looks like you're a hole in the wall, because people are like, man, this HVAC company, are they legit? I don't know if I want to leave my job to go to this one. So trying to convey what a business is and really streamline things is, I think, where somebody like us comes into play, because we power you with an admin panel that you can edit everything on the fly. A newer company that there's so much overhead with starting a business. And excuse me, instead of spending a lot of money on a website, you when you're starting off, I think it's so important to get that success. Just go make sales. Whatever you're doing, get some success, get a year or two of success where if somebody's building you a professional website, they're going to say, do you have photos of, let's say you're a roofing company and you come to me and say, because this actually happened with my own brother. He started a roofing company 10, 15 years ago or something. And he's like, what do you think I should do? I'm like, just build the most simplistic website possible. And once you actually have substance, get some cool drone photos of the roof. We'll do all these cool things. But until you build that book of business, it can be hard to take substance. So I think when you're starting off, these Squarespace websites and these little do-it-yourself websites can be good because it's going to match that, hey, we're a new business. There's definitely exceptions to it, but I think when you're starting off and you need to really try to stretch your resources as far as they can go, there's a lot of intermediate website services now that you'll outgrow very fast if your company is growing. But I think especially initially, there's ways to figure out how to stretch that from a marketing standpoint. And it's probably going to mean do it yourself. Same thing with social media. I think social is a great thing to pay for. I also think it's a great thing to do in-house. But I've got some friends, I've got some clients that just aren't good at it. Well, if you're not good at it, own that. I think that's a strength to know where your weak areas are and have somebody help you. But for a website, when you're just starting off, I think the more you can do yourself initially, and again, you're going to outgrow it very fast, but the more you can do initially, I think you'll be better off when starting a company.
Justin, you talking about a lot of the stuff that you were doing back in the day when you were in high school and that sort of stuff. Is this all self-taught?
Yeah, believe it or not. I went to a community college for 2 months, a month maybe. And I vividly remember I was dating this girl at the time, and I was hanging out with her at night, and then I was working at Wegmans Warehouse in the morning. And then by the time I went to class, I was just absolutely exhausted. And I fell asleep, and I was just out cold on the desk. And I was so tired that like a week later, or maybe it was even the week before, I actually fell asleep driving and just drove right off the road. And thankfully there was like a ditch that was very slow. So no accident or nothing, but started, falling asleep driving. So I was so tired and I fell asleep in class. And my professor was like, you don't have to be here. Like, you're paying to be here. If you don't want to be here, don't be here. I never went back. I just
did you get up at that moment?
I can't remember. I might have. I think it was like towards the end of the class he did that, but I just remember so vividly, like, you're right. It's just never coming back. That was maybe a month or two into it. But my initial plan was I wanted to go to school for journalism. And, I didn't think that what I was doing with websites was anything special. I thought that was just a hobby. I'm a pro wrestling fan. These are pro wrestling websites. It's cool. Made a couple $1,000 as a high schooler. Now it's time to grow up. I didn't realize the business side of it yet. I was just looking at it like this is a fun hobby.
And so how did you get into it at such an early age in high school? Did you have like a technology class in school or something, or just?
No, I actually we had a computer at home and I'm an introvert by design. Just leave me alone and let me do my thing. And if you give somebody like that a computer at an early age, there's so much you can do to explore on there. And I remember just early web days. I mean, I actually think I didn't buy it. I got my initials, jjb.net, for free. So I'm pretty sure way back when you didn't have to buy a domain. You could just kind of register it and have access to it. And so I used to just play with websites way back when. And I mean, I don't know how much you guys remember from the early days of the web, but programs like Macromedia Flash and other things that are long gone, but just playing with it was fascinating to me. And one of the consistencies with websites over the last, however many decades we've been doing this now, you can right click on a website and you can click view page source and you can see the entire source of the website. Nowadays, it's a lot more complicated. A lot of the code isn't actually there. Way back when, you used to be able to see all the code by just clicking view page source. So I would see, okay, the little sideways arrow, B sideways arrow means bold. Okay, cool. Doing it with a U means underline. And I just kind of, slowly started piecemealing things together and figuring out how stuff works, where I would take a website and basically copy it start to finish. And I would take a website, I'd copy it, I would change everything to see what did what. And I learned how they worked enough to where I'm like, okay. I mean, and back then, not to get too technical, but you used to have the same code on every single site or every single page of the site. There wasn't this thing now where you have one piece of code and it goes on every page wherever you want it. So then like includes and different things started happening that made it easier and easier. And it was just kind of the right time where I was able to figure out because of the simplicity of it. And it just fascinated me. And I think I had built, I don't know, a dozen websites or so in high school that we ran. And it was always just something that to me was fun to kind of explore it and see how they work.
It's amazing.
Yeah, you make me feel super basic, man. Taught yourself how to do that and created a business off of it. So at what point did you realize, hey, I'm kind of don't need to go back to the school thing and I'm kind of making this happen?
When I graduated high school, I moved in with a buddy of mine. We got an apartment and I got a full-time job. And I lived about as basically as one could live. I didn't have any free time. I just worked and hung out with my girlfriend, and I didn't do a heck of a lot. Hung out with my friends a little bit. Like I didn't do much. So when I graduated high school, I completely just walked away from everything. Like again, I thought it was like a hobby. I didn't think it was anything that would last. A couple years later, my buddy Mike got a hold of me and he's like, dude, what we were doing, is more advanced than what a lot of people are doing. He's like, would you mind helping me a little bit? I'm like, dude, I work at a warehouse. Like, I can't help you with computers. And he's like, just help me now and then. So I said, okay. So one thing that I've always been good at is speed. Anything that requires speed. It's one reason why I can put news out usually pretty quick. I've always been very fast on computers. So I would help him with different things. And it was a lot of like task oriented stuff. And he'd be like, dude, I need you to move these 500 products from this website to this website. I want to drop ship the same products. Can you help me? Sure. So I'd help him a little bit here and there. And then it got to be where at the time he was helping out people kind of here and there. And together we both kind of realized that, hey, we can help more businesses with this. And he's based down in Florida and I'm up in New York. So in 2007, he started a company and I'm like, you know what? Maybe I'll start the same one here. Because what was happening up here is people, were asking me like, what are you doing, dude? And I'd tell them like, can you help me? Like one of my first business clients was an electric surplus company. And he saw what I was doing. I think I saw him at the gym or something. And he was asking me, like, what are you doing? And I would tell him, I was like, well, do you think you can kind of do that for my company? I said, sure. So he hired us. And at that time, it was just me. And I'm like, I'm not that smart, but I can't just get a check made out to my name, right? So I started a company so that I could help him. At the same time, my buddy was starting a company down in Florida, and we said, look, we'll work together and, we'll leverage some of the same talent, but it makes sense for us both to start local companies and help people in our area because we're both personable people. So he was going to help people down in Florida. I help people here. And there's things that I hired him to do, and there's things that he hired me to do. And, it was a pretty cool feeling to where people had to start reaching out to me to say, could you help my company? And I'm like, I guess so. Where so many people nowadays, like being an entrepreneur is so cool. People are like, what can I go do to start a company? For me, I never thought about being a business owner ever. I thought I would maybe be like 50th, 60th on the ladder of a company. Never thought I could run a company. So it was cool that it was kind of like forced on me, and I had to start figuring everything else out, accounting and all the other aspects financially, where to spend money, it's crazy the things that you're forced to learn. But yeah, it was cool that it, was basically born out of a need people were asking us for.
How soon after all of that did you step away from Wegmans, and do you still shop there?
So I worked in Wegmans warehouse in 2004, right when I graduated high school. And I left because a year later I wanted to go on vacation with my girlfriend, and they told me no. And I'm like, why? It's just, 5-day vacation. Like, well, you can't take a vacation yet. You don't get vacation time. You don't get time off. And I'm like, well, that's stupid. And they're like, well, that's the way this works. Go see your union leader or whatever. So I went on vacation and never went back. So I was doing odd jobs, driveway sealing, roofing. A friend of mine that I grew up with, their parents own a check cashing in a liquor store. So he actually was like, this is where the story kind of gets crazy. At about this point, I was actually living out of my car. My mom had kicked me out of my house. I was just like a slug. So I was living out of my car for about a month. And my buddy's parents were like, listen, you got to kind of get back on your feet. And he said, why don't you come work for me? So I slowly started working for him in his check cashing liquor store and started, getting some consistency. My grandpa had to take me because my car got repossessed, and I had to slowly build back everything. So when all this internet stuff started happening, I would basically work at this check cashing liquor store from like 12 to 9 every day. So everything I did on the computer was from like 6 a.m. to 11:20, 11:25 when my grandpa would come pick me up. Then I'd come home and I'd work more. Eventually, what had happened is I'd say I probably started working with him in like 2006 or 2007 at the check cashing and liquor store. And then it wasn't until 2000, I started the company in 2008. And then I'd say it wasn't until 2010 probably where I did both full time. I worked 50, 60 hours a week at the liquor store, and then I worked 50, 60 hours a week trying to build the company. Eventually, I slowly started cutting my hours back. And I can't speak enough to, he was, in hindsight, I can see it now, how protective he was being, making sure I wasn't just going to fall back into a bad place, not have a job, not have money, not have a place to live. So he slowly let me cut my hours back. And eventually I just worked 1 day a week. And I think that was his way of making sure that no matter what, I've got a 1 day a week paycheck to at least pay for, the essentials. And I did that 1 day a week for probably about a year, maybe 6 to 12 months. And eventually I told him, like, look, I've got so much work to do. please don't make me come work next week. He's like, okay. And I think that kind of made him feel good about this was a good time. But yeah, I did both full time for about 2-3 years, and it was crazy. Back to the very initial question, Wegmans is probably, I don't know, a 4-time-a-week place for me. There's nothing like it.
Okay.
Wegmans, I'm a groupie of Wegmans.
Right on. We have one by we're back home where we grew up in New Jersey. Not too far.
Wegmans is the best. There's nothing like it. Scott Green and I always go back and forth on Twitter about it because he's from Buffalo, so he's a big Wegmans guy.
Okay.
Living in your car, you said you never thought you would ever run a company. You'd be happy being 57th on the ladder in that company. You mentioned starting the podcast, faith and politics. Heard you on some other podcasts talk about your faith. I feel like you ask a lot of your people you're interviewing about their faith. How much did your faith help you through that situation? And when you look back on things, not wanting to ever run your own business or never even thinking about it, how much do you think your faith helped with that as well?
I think it was everything for me in knowing how much it played a part in my life and what I think God had a weird plan that I had to get on board with. And I think I did everything to avoid it initially. And for me, everything I've done, I look back and there's so many times that I can look back and see, okay, I see what God did there. I see what God did there. And when I started the podcast, there was a lot of conversations I would have offline with a lot of these wrestlers that are amazing humans and they have such bold faith, but nobody ever asks them about it. And so that was one thing that when I started Bashmania, I wanted to carry over that faith aspect where the podcast I did with my buddy Billy, there was a lot of celebrities on the podcast. One of the coolest stories was Phil Robertson, the guy from the Duck Commander show. He came on and he was telling us this whole story about how he basically gave Trump a hand-drawn note about how he needed Jesus, and come back like a month later, Trump ran into him, or he ran into Trump, and Trump showed him that drawing that he had. And there's so many cool stories that I've heard that are stories like that I've loved being able to share with others on the podcast. So when I started Bashmania, being able to let these wrestlers tell their stories has been such a crucial component. And it's one of those things where, when I was 18, 19, I never drank. I never did drugs. I was never like a bad kid where it's like, oh, you need Jesus. You're this, you're an alcoholic, you're a druggie. For me, I was just lost. And I think when I got saved, when I was like 19, 20 years old, I want to say, probably like 19, that for me was just like a foundation of I needed something that I didn't know I need. And it was right around that same time when I started doing the web stuff again. And I had started going back to just not even going back, started going to a place to where I had a foundation of something and I had somewhere to turn for things that I needed. And when I started my company, I mean, I would say what was that? It was 2008. So I was 22. I was young. I had no intention of ever starting a company. And when I started it, it took a lot of prayer. It took a lot of like, God, what do you want me to do? I've done a million things in my life. I've done a lot of wrong things. I've done a lot of stupid things. If this is just another stupid thing I'm doing, I don't want to do it. And I've always been one, the last, running a company, it's a very nice thing for me to just give things to God and say, if this isn't of you, if this isn't for me, just shut the door. I don't care who the client is. I don't care what the opportunity is. If this isn't for me, if this isn't what you want from me, then I don't want it. And the number of times I've looked back and be like, oh, wow, dodged a huge bullet there. Oh, wow, didn't get involved with that person. And now that person's in jail. Oh, wow. Or opportunities that I thought maybe I was not above, but I'm a big proponent, for example, in working for free. I still do it to this day, probably more often than a lot of people would think because they see the success, but kind of having that humility that you're not better than anybody, you're not above anything, and having that grounding and having that foundation. Without it, I would not have the success I have. It's not possible for me, knowing how many bad decisions I've made without God's constant guidance. There's no way I can make the decisions to be this successful. I'd be in jail for anything you could probably think of. I'd be like, sure. I just know the levels of depravity humans can go to, and it never surprises me. And I think left alone, I'm sure there's things you can think of that you're like, why did I do that? Why did I do that? And we still do it. But I think having that faith and having that guidance that God gives me has made all the difference in being able to admit weakness in some areas is very hard for people. I think as a business owner, it's a strength. If you know your weaknesses, you know where you can hire somebody, you know where you can get help, you know where to not try to go down a rabbit hole of, how do I do this? Is this the best thing? No, go hire help. You're weak in that area. So for me, just kind of leaning on that faith has been, I'd say probably I give a lot of credit to my wife now, but we didn't meet till we were, I was 10 years into the company. So I'm 36 now. I met my wife when I was 31, I believe. So my entire 20s was just head down working. And as you start having a little success, the world will throw a lot of things at you that will distract you, that can destroy you. And just having my head down and trusting that God always had what was best in store for me coming next was a crucial aspect, I think, to all the success I've had.
Thank you for sharing that. You mentioned foundation. That is everything, right? And I think my foundation has got me through at a lot of times in my life when my faith was really weak. Also, you mentioned just asking God or talking to God, hey, if this isn't of your light or of your source, I don't want anything to do it. I think that's an important thing to press home with people, is just the power of prayer, power of having that communication and that talking with God. I just appreciate you sharing that and being so open with that with us. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the opportunity to be able to. I mean, I think a lot of people, when you see, I hate the term religion, but it's what a lot of people dwell on it. And when you see religion, you typically see a lot of formality. You see a lot of, like, I don't want to pick on anybody or what they believe, but you see just a lot of rituals and you see a lot of formalities. And I think that just, it robs people of the joy. If you read through the Bible, if you read through everything God did, it's not to keep us down. It's not to keep us in a habit of rituals. It's to experience freedom. And part of freedom is the ability to talk to God. There's been so many times that I remember early on in my Christian walk, there was things that I thought were dumb to pray about, or things that I thought like I had to, kind of approach God in a certain way. And the more I got a grip on the fact that, I can talk to God open and freely, just like I do my wife, just like I do with my kid, even though he's only one. Like, having that relationship is what is really freeing to people. And I think when you see people who experience bondage or a lack of freedom from religion, and I had a buddy of mine that I went to high school with, his mom started going to our church and she loved it. She's like, it is amazing that this church preaches what a relationship with Jesus can do for you, and that it's not just about a ritual. It's not just about habits. It's not just about being a good person. And I think for me, having that freedom, it gives you a lot of peace. And there's things that, as a business owner, as a content creator, as anything, there's things, as a content creator, you have a lot of negativity. You deal with a lot of people who just tell you, you suck, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, you're this, you're that, whatever. Having that foundation that, like, when people are negative to me online, I typically have empathy for them. It's kind of a thing that I know Gary Vee talks a lot about, but when we see people in real life that are attacking you for something, we're very quick to realize, man, that person, like, they need help, and not in like a mean way, like saying it truly. When it's on the internet, we kind of give everybody an equal playing field, and it can sometimes hurt people more than others because you think, who is this person? And you kind of esteem them too high. So I think having that foundation and trying to just not trust yourself too much, trust God, that'll help. The power of prayer, especially in business, with content, with everything. Should I do this? Should I not? Man, there's things that look like you should do it that the world will deceive you into saying, do this, do this, do this. But for me, it's been a constant. Now I'm blessed to be married because I can ask my wife, like, I'll pray about something and ask her. And, you really, when you feel like God's telling you something and then your spouse tells you the same thing, it's a very good feeling. So for me, without that power of prayer, without that foundation, without that peace, like, man, I probably would have stopped this company 2-3 years in.
Well, again, I really appreciate you sharing those sorts of things. It's definitely something that's we hold close to us as well too, in different ways and different practices. But to tie it, I guess, all in before we get into our rapid fire, I'm curious, knowing that you're tying it back into wrestling, I was curious if you saw sort of the little bit of backlash that Aaron Brooks got for his, and then tying it back into like the worst time to interview a wrestler is right after he's had this emotional dump in his drain. But there were some people that really were offended by what Aaron said after he won about his faith and stuff like that. I don't know if you saw that with Ariel Helwani and what he posted and some of the comments that came about from that.
Yeah, I mean, I think no matter what, you're going to have that. I think the backlash Aaron got, in my opinion, is simply because people aren't used to people being outspoken about their faith.
Right.
If you have a Muslim saying what they believe Jesus is, Christians are going to think one way. If you have a Christian saying what they think Jesus is and what Muhammad is, you're going to have, of course, the other religion feeling something. I think this is just a result of people that society does not want you to be bold about your faith. I don't care what your faith is, from the sense of, if you see somebody who's bold in their faith, that is very contagious. Even if it's not your faith. I am a Christian. I love Jesus. If I see a Muslim who is bold about their faith, you respect their boldness. But that's something we don't see a lot of in society. So I think what is happening is Ariel Helwani, he doesn't talk a lot about his faith. So it's one of those things where it's like, it's almost one of those things where it's like, everybody wants everybody to be hush hush. And if you're not hush hush, I'm going to tell you that I'm offended by you. And that's a whole bunny trail for a podcast episode in and of itself, with people being offended. So, I commend Aaron for his boldness. I think when you have a faith that is contagious, the majority of the people who were upset by him, if you really looked at who was saying anything, were people worried he offended somebody else. There was a few people that said, I'm offended. A lot of the initial backlash I saw was, Aaron, how dare you offend that person? Aaron, how dare you offend that person? That was when I was talking with a couple people, because right away people are like, dude, you got to have Aaron on, like continue the conversation, tell him, now that he's seen it play out. And I'm like, listen, Aaron's always welcome. He's been on my podcast 2 or 3 times. We've talked to, I've had Aaron on talking about his faith. He came on with David Carr. It's nothing he shies away from. But for me, when I saw that backlash, right away, I'm realizing, hey, a lot of these people are just worried about offending somebody else. Wasn't even, I know Aaron pretty well. He doesn't want to offend anybody. He's not here to hurt anybody's, feelings, or he's just being bold about what he believes and what he knows. And I think when you have a culture that is so worried about offending people, you naturally see a night like that. And it was over. It was a couple days, you saw a couple people like Ariel tweet about it. And then by, Monday, I think Fox News did an article about it. Franklin Graham said something. And by Tuesday, it was completely out of the media. It's gone. So, yeah, I think the majority of that was just a result of the culture of don't be offensive or don't do anything that might offend anybody.
Yeah, no doubt. That's well put.
Yeah, very well put. And that was something I didn't even take into consideration as far as the people who were people chirping for other people and not necessarily themselves. So it was
there was definitely a couple people that I saw. I think Ariel was one, I believe, who he said he was personally offended. But a lot of and by the way, if Ariel Helwani wanted to reach out to Aaron Brooks and said, I want to talk to you about this, Aaron's not shying away. Aaron was given a microphone in his face on a spotlight he earned and said what's in his heart. I don't think he's going to shy away from having that conversation with anybody. But the majority of it that I saw was just, how dare you offend so-and-so?
Yeah, welcome to 2023.
Right.
I was hoping that Ariel had him on. I really had my fingers crossed for that because we could use some of that crossover. I think he would be a good platform to get some wrestlers on that show for sure.
He did awesome with David Taylor went on there.
Yeah.
And he did awesome. Yeah,
Bo's been on there too.
Yep. Yeah, Bo's been on there a couple times. It's nice. What I liked about David being on was I liked him having a current wrestler on. He seems to be he has a big respect for wrestling. He does a lot with Daniel Cormier. Daniel doesn't stop talking about wrestling. Bo Nickel's on there now a lot, doesn't stop talking about wrestling. So it's definitely good. I mean, I just had Austin O'Connor on the podcast this morning, and he was talking about going to MMA next. So I think the more wrestlers in MMA you're going to start seeing, I'm hopeful that the mainstream MMA, UFC media start covering wrestlers before they get to MMA. And I think you're going to see it.
Yeah, I think we're on the cusps there, and with Stalemates doing some stuff with UFC Fight Pass, and I believe Josiah was doing some stuff. I think it's going to happen, and it's only going to be great for the sport. Before we get into our rapid fire questions, I must ask you 2 professional wrestling questions.
Let's hear them.
Who's your favorite wrestler of all time? It can be more than one.
It's a tough question. I always have that as a pro wrestling fan that always lingers in your head. I think many people, it's, you struggle to kind of pick a favorite, because for me, it kind of goes by era,
Okay. Yeah.
There's such a different respect. I'd be remiss not to go Hogan, because my podcast is Bashmania, and the colors, I mean, it's up there. The colors are, red and yellow. It's not too far from his original logo. So I'd have to go Hogan, but I mean, going through that era where you have, Undertaker and The Rock, it's so hard to pick favorites. I'm also admittedly a fan of people that I get to know. And after having Kurt Angle on the podcast and growing up with Kurt, like being a fan of him, that was super cool to where he climbed the list of
That was an
top
awesome
favorites.
episode. That was one of
Thank
my
you.
favorite episodes. That and the Gerald Briscoe episode. You need more professional
So
wrestlers on.
I've started. I don't know if you can see it over there. There's a Kurt Angle and a Jerry Briscoe action figure.
Let's go.
So I told my wife what I'm going to do is anytime I have a WWE guy on, I'm going to buy an action figure for them. So it's in the hopper. I'm definitely interested in having more on.
Hey, Cody Rhodes is about to win the title, and he was a 2-time Georgia State champ. So who knows?
I know he's a potential. Dolph Ziggler. He was a Kent State guy. I'd like to have him on. So yeah, and now Jacob Kasper, he's doing awesome things in NXT. He was on a couple times. That might have been one of my favorite episodes to date. Jacob Kasper was going to come on. He only had like 30 minutes. We end up going for like 2 hours. He missed whatever he had to do because we were just so into the conversation and reminiscing about our early days. And he started crying at one point in the episode. He got emotional thinking about NCAAs and his mom and stuff. One of my all-time favorite people and favorite episodes, Jacob Kasper, definitely.
And last professional wrestling question I got for you. Do you have a favorite either pay-per-view or favorite moment of all time?
Man, that's tough. That's tough. You know, the Monday Night Wars were my favorite when you were flipping back and forth between Raw and Nitro and you couldn't keep one on because the other one was trying to one up the other. That was definitely my favorite time period back when they'd run both pay-per-views on the same night, try to get stuff from each other. I don't know if I could pinpoint. The NWO when like Hogan came out and he came out as black and white Hollywood Hogan, that was a very, very, that had to be like 2000, 2001. That right there, I don't know if I could pinpoint the match or pay-per-view, but I would say that time frame, like Hogan turning into bad guy, is probably one of my all-time favorites.
Bash at the Beach 97.
Yeah, that was about when I started watching. It was about 97.
That's
like when Terry Funk, or when Cactus Jack threw Terry Funk off the stage in a dumpster.
Chainsaw Charlie.
Chainsaw Charlie at the time. Yeah.
Yeah. That NWO moment, that's my all-time. That's my JFK moment for me.
Yep.
Like I remember where I was. I was in the TV room watching it with Rich. Rich was like, "What is this? Hulk Hogan's a bad guy." I was like, "Oh my god!" But yeah,
yeah, that was one of my all-time favorites. I weirdly too, one of the moments that sticks out to me, not as a good one, but the night Owen Hart died, that was such a weird night because watching it at home, you didn't know if it was a gimmick. You didn't know what happened. And even though they tell you like this isn't a gimmick, this isn't a work, you didn't know. So I think like that night vividly sticks out in my mind. Like you remember where you were, you remember who you talked to when you those days were something else. That was a sad day, but that one sticks out for sure.
Yeah.
Definitely another one of those moments. Definitely agree with you on that. So for our rapid fire questions, first one is, are you a coffee drinker?
So I love coffee, but it puts me to sleep. So it's very weird. I grew up with ADHD and things like coffee have like a reverse effect. So like if my wife and I go somewhere, I love having a coffee. But like when I wake up, I go right to pre-workout. Not even to work out, just like I'll have a couple scoops of amino energy the second I wake up. And then she'll make me a coffee at like, let's say, like I get up at like 5:30. She'll make me a coffee at like 9 or 10. It's delicious coffee, but then I'll fall asleep. Like we had a baby last year, and as a push present, I got her this beautiful coffee machine that it's what is it? I don't even know the brand. But it's a nice machine where you brew the espresso, you grind the beans, then you brew the espresso. Like it makes legit coffee, and it is delicious. But I get sleepy like 45 minutes later.
That's
It's like a
wild.
sleepy time tea for you.
I know, exactly.
Justin, do you have any daily practices or ritual that you do on a regular basis to show up as the strongest version of yourself?
I've been doing the same morning routine for like 15 years, and I stray from it at times, but ever since I've started my company, number one is arguably within minutes of waking up, I go through my phone and I go through almost every notification possible just to see if there's anything urgent going on. Is there absolutely anything that needs to be taken care of right now? Digital in my space is 24/7. So I go to bed early. I go to bed at like 8:30, 9:30. Like I go to bed pretty early. So when I sleep from, let's call it 9 to 5, 9 to 6, whatever it is, I miss a lot. So I wake up and I go through everything on my phone. Usually there's not too much, fires to put out. I'll try to read my Bible for 15, 20, 25 minutes, as much as I can before I get distracted by everything I got to do. Then I've been lazy lately, but then I typically work out about 45 minutes to an hour. Usually, so for a while when I was working out at a gym, I would try to sauna and steam room after my workout. And I'd always use that time to pray. Praying in the morning is something I think I've done every day for the last 15 years. Even if there's days where I wake up and there's chaos, and even the most simplistic prayers of God, just have your hand on this day. Give me wisdom, give me discernment, just have your hand on this day. Or there's days that if I can pray for as long as I really want, my pastor likes to say, pray until you actually start praying. I think that's good advice. So having that time in a sauna or steam room, we actually have a hot tub now. So lately it's been a lot of that. It's hot tub and prayer. And then I'd say after that, I have the same protein shake now for the last like 10 years. It's banana, almond milk, vanilla, plant protein, peanut butter, spinach, and ice. That's my go-to like every single day. And from there, it's a shower and get to work. And usually when I'm working out and doing stuff, I'm on my phone, I'm going through things. But at that point, I've got a solid couple hours where, spiritually, mentally, physically, I've kind of geared up for the day, and now I'm ready for whatever the day brings.
You have a favorite passage or go-to passage, or is it depending on the mood?
Yeah, it really depends on the day. I mean, there's so many things that I've gone through so much in life that one of my biggest comforts with going through a storm or going through a trial is that God will often use you to minister to somebody else. So when you go through something, it sucks. But then when you're able to say, hey, I've been through that. Hey, I've lived out of my car. Hey, I've gone through a breakup. I've had a miscarriage. When you can relate to somebody on that level and their guard comes down, you can be so much stronger of a friend, a brother, a sister, or whatever when you have that empathy and when you've been there. So for me, a lot of scripture that I really love is scripture that I can minister to people, or depending on what season of life I'm in or going through, there's things that hit me at different times. One of my favorites is definitely, I have it tattooed here, Romans 5:8, which is while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. I think that's an important one because you always hear people say, if I walked into church, the place would burn down, this, that. but God, he sent Jesus to die for us in our state of sin. It's not when we're all cleaned up and we look good and we're doing good and acting like Mother Teresa. It's in our filth, in our disgustingness that he thought of us. So for me, that's one that always kind of reminds me, like, don't let the enemy get you down, that you are bad, you messed up, whatever. Like, you're not surprising God by anything you did today.
What do you have a Bible of choice that you read out of?
I personally like the New King James Version. I like King James the best, but I do read first thing in the morning. I think that's a crucial thing to do if you can. And when you're reading King James at 5 a.m, at times you want that New King James Version to get rid of the thous and the Old English. So for me, it's probably the New King James Version is one I use daily.
Right on. What are you listening to right now? Music, podcasts, audiobooks? Are you reading anything?
I go through spurts where I read books. I don't consume that much content. I like listening to Christian worship music. I actually have a Bashmania playlist where I had like my first 30 or 40 guests. I texted them one day randomly and I said, give me your number one go-to song. Like, I texted Yanni, what is your go-to song when you're warming up? And Yanni would say, Hot in Here by Nelly. Okay. I went to somebody else. All right, Bo, what's your favorite song, number one? He would say, Hand of God. Okay. And I basically went to everyone, like the first 40 guests. Most of them gave me a good song. Spencer Lee didn't have one. I said, what a Pokemon theme song? Like, give me something. So I listen to like random playlists like that. But aside from that, I'm not a big music guy. I like Gary Vee's books, Chip Gaines' books. One of the best books I read was, what's it called? Let me look it up real quick. Bob Goff is an amazing author. There's a couple books I've read, Love Does and Everybody Always. Those were books that I think I read. And I'm not a big reader. I read them in one day. I couldn't put them down. Phenomenal books. I will admit, a TV junkie. So when I work, I have TV on like all day. And it's either like right now I'm watching a combination of Modern Family, Home Improvement. I love sitcoms. So believe it or not, I have sitcoms on like 24/7 in my office. And that's what I listen to more than anything, probably.
What are your favorite sitcoms? I know you mentioned what you're
Home
watching.
Improvement's up there. I'm watching Modern Family now. I'm in season 9. That's absolutely hilarious. My wife and I have watched New Girl probably 5 times. I've seen The Office probably 15 times. I'm a fan of old shows. I don't really like what they're making right now, sitcom wise. Modern Family is probably the outlier for me. A lot of what I do is I'll go back and watch shows like Home Improvement time and time again. Home Improvement, Last Man Standing, those are definitely up there. Office, obviously one of the greatest shows of all time. Seinfeld, I go back and watch. I feel like The Office and Seinfeld, I'm always watching. It's just, where are you? And I can always just pick right up. I know exactly when I'm watching Seinfeld, George just got hired at the Yankees. At The Office, what was happening? It was Jim and Pam just got married. It was around there. But yeah, I'm always in different spots in all these shows. It's crazy.
Right on. Always good to quote the Office and or Seinfeld. It's usually good for a laugh in a group of the guys.
That's why I use them for the reference for the podcast. Like when I tell people, I don't care what you do for a living, you can leverage a podcast to create awareness. And the Dwight and Jim examples, like even if you sell paper, Dwight and Jim could go start a podcast and it would be absolutely hilarious. And at the end, sponsored by Dunder Mifflin, and they sell paper. So I don't care what people do. I think they should try a podcast. I think it could be very good for any business, anybody in sales. And Jim and Dwight having a podcast and Jerry and George having a podcast would have to be two of the all-time podcasts if they existed.
Would Kramer be a guest host, or would he be the producer?
Oh, Kramer would be one of those guys that like he's like a recurring guest. He's a staple. I think just like when they pitched the sitcom in the show, I think George and Jerry would have the great podcast, and you'd rotate in Kramer, you rotate in Elaine, like just would be an all-time podcast.
Yeah, definitely. Just the last one for you. Could be anything. I've had people say sport related, could be food related. Do you have a guilty pleasure?
I'd probably say sitcoms. A lot of what I do is we built a house a couple of years ago on 10 acres. And a lot of what I spend my time doing is working on our property. I don't do a heck of a lot of anything else. I'm pretty confident in my pizza. I have a lot of pizza, but that's just too good to call a guilty pleasure. That's just something you have to enjoy. But sitcoms is that one thing that I would say a lot of what I do, I don't like. I love either filling myself with something of value or doing something of value. It's working around the house, working, if Basch Solutions has a quiet kind of day, you'll know because I'm able to put out a bunch more content for Bash Mania. So for me, I'd say sitcoms. That's where it's just, I think everybody needs a bit of escapism. And when you have sitcoms that mean absolutely nothing but give you a good laugh, I'd probably pick that.
Right on. I got two for you. Maybe not necessarily. First one's probably not necessarily a sitcom, but we're a fan of Entourage.
Yeah, Entourage is such a great show. I mean, Entourage, I was disappointed by the movie, but one of my guys at Bass Solutions, he's been with me pretty much since day one, is one of the smartest developers I've ever met. Him more than me, quotes Ari Gold on a weekly basis. Every single week for the last decade. There's not a week goes by, we're very good friends. So it's not like a very formal relationship whatsoever. Very good friends. And when he starts, if I ask him something, where are you going? And, he'll throw a line like, the heart just got flown in, I got to go do the transplant. Or he'll do the whiteboard thing, are you deaf? Because if your ears can't hear, get the F out. Like he'll just start rapid firing all caps Ari Gold quotes. And there's just nothing like that. Like the paintball scene. It's nothing like it.
Yeah, no doubt. Those are good ones. So the other one I had for you was Eastbound and Down.
I did not watch that one. I got referred to it a lot. I never got started with it. I have like a list of shows that people always tell me, like, you got to watch this one. And I never seem to get, like, Breaking Bad. I had so many people tell me you got to watch it. I just never got into it.
Yeah.
But that's actually a show that the same guy who loves Entourage, he's the one who's pressing me to see that. So I'm not surprised to hear him as a 1-2.
Another one that was pretty good. Eastbound and Down got a little dark as the pilot season is like all comedy nonstop. But another one with Danny McBride starts off funny, gets a little darker, but it's that Righteous Gemstones.
I haven't even heard of that one.
Yeah, so it's fairly recent, within the last 3 years, I guess. Right? It's on HBO. It's but it's about It's about like evangelical Christians that live in South Carolina, and it's all about like the big, mega churches and all that sort of stuff. And there's like
Yeah.
this
No, I haven't heard of that
family.
one.
It's some funny stuff too, but there's definitely some weird like darkness to it. But if you
Yeah.
like Danny McBride, it's pretty funny.
Eastbound and Down, he loved like giving me Kenny Powers lines.
Yeah.
And if you don't see the show, like you can appreciate some of them. Like there's the classic meme of him throwing down the chair, stuff like that like everybody knows. But he used to try to get me into that because he would always refer kind of like he does with Ari Gold. There was Kenny lines that he would send me that I'm like, I didn't see it.
Yeah. Gotta be there.
Right.
Right on. Justin, it's been amazing talking with you. Really appreciate your time. I know it's past your bedtime, so thank you for spending your Wednesday night with us. It's been
Yeah,
epic.
it's been fun, man. I appreciate you guys reaching out, having me on, especially giving me a platform to talk about my faith. It is always an honor. It's something I try to do. So when somebody else gives me that, I really appreciate it.
So thanks
Awesome,
again,
guys.
sir.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. Have a great night.
You too, guys. See ya.
Take care.